All right, everyone, welcome back to the JT Sports Podcast. Joined by a special guest, longtime friend of the pod, Quincy Bell Sports. We got to talk Indiana football, man. You are a current IU student. You can see it with the Indiana tee that you got on. You looking fresh, looking sharp, and Hoosiers football has been looking sharp on the field. You're off to a 6-0 start, the best start this team has had in damn near 2 decades. And Curt Cignetti in his first year at Indiana has been able to do what seems to be impossible, and that's to actually have sustainable success at this program. What isn't that Curt Cignetti has done so differently as compared to previous Indiana coaches in the past that is having success?
All right, thank you again, JT, for having me on. I always have fun when I come on here, and this is the best start Indiana has had since 1967. That was the only time they ever won the Big Ten in football. So Curt Cignetti got hired because Tom Allen was the previous coach, and he had a lot of success during the COVID year when Michael Penix was the quarterback and Kalen DeBoer, surprise, surprise, was the offensive coordinator. At the end of that so they finished in the top 10. They didn't win a bowl game because Michael Penix got hurt before the bowl game, so Jack Tuttle had to play in the bowl game, and they did not win the bowl game. But the next year, they were ranked 17th in the preseason poll because everyone's like, oh, they're next up in the Big Ten. Michael Penix is this amazing force. And he didn't play well, and he got injured. And Indiana finished the year 2-10. They were basically what Florida State is this season. They were ranked, and they had all the expectations, and none of it panned out. And then the next couple of years, they went 4-8 my freshman year here, 3-9 my sophomore year last year, and they canned Tom Allen. They said, we're done. So they hired Curt Cignetti, and I think 2 days after he got hired, he made a speech at a basketball game that I was at, and he said, I've never backed down from anyone, and we're not starting now. Gave this rousing speech, and everyone loved it. But at the same time, everyone's like, I need to see it on the field. I need to see it on the field. And they've come out this year, and granted, they haven't played that many good teams, if any, but they look like world beaters. They're averaging 47 points a game, and their defense is, I think they're second in offensive efficiency and 11th in defense, which is crazy to think about for Indiana. He coached under Saban for like a little bit, so a lot of people have drawn a lot of comparisons. I think he's a very no-nonsense coach. He's not going to take anything from anybody. He's got a whole team of hard workers, and they've just been tearing things apart. He brought over 13 players from James Madison. He brought over Curtis Rourke from Ohio, who's in his 7th or 6th year of college football. He's super old, but he's been playing really well. And I'll give you one more thing. I've never been to an Indiana game where the stadium was full when the game started and full when the game ended. Before their game against Maryland, that was their last home game, Curt Cignetti sent an email to all the students. He said, I need you there the whole game, and I need you to be loud the whole game. It was pissing rain that whole game, and everyone stayed the whole game. They've been looking great. It's mostly the offense that leads them. I think their offense is a lot better than their defense, but there's only 3 or 4 players that I even recognize from their team last year. They've been so much better.
Speaking of Curtis Rourke, where would you put him in terms of his chances to win the Heisman this year? Because he has had a really strong season, 14-2 touchdown interception ratio. He's been really efficient.
I've seen people put him on their Heisman list. The highest I've seen him is 5. I would have him, if I had to make a top 10, I would probably put him either 9 or 10 or in the consideration category. Now, if he goes out and he puts up a big game against Nebraska or puts up a big game against Michigan, he could definitely be vaulted into that category. I remember being at the first game against FIU, and my friend's like, he's such a game manager. I don't think he's that great. But I don't think he's a game manager at all, coming from his last couple games. He's a quarterback that can go down and win you a game. He's terrific on third down. I think Indiana has one of the highest third down conversion rates in the country. He stands tall in the pocket, makes a throw when he needs to. He's not great running the ball, but he can if there's room, like he will take off and run and he'll get some yards. I think in terms of winning the Heisman, I think he still has a lot to prove, but halfway through the year, he's definitely in consideration.
It seems to be somewhat of a March Madness feel around this team because for so long, Indiana football has pretty much been irrelevant. You've been the basketball school since the beginning of age. And to get out to the best start that you've had in 57 years, you think about the ceiling for this team because the playoffs has expanded to 12 and college football has already been super chaotic this year with all the upsets. And we obviously are going to see a few teams into the playoffs this year that nobody saw coming. How do you feel about IU's playoff chances at this point in the season?
Well, ESPN actually has them favored in 5 of their 6 remaining games. The only one that they don't have them favored in is at Ohio State. Their next batch of games, they're home against Nebraska, home against Washington, at Michigan State, home against Michigan, at Ohio State, and then home against Purdue, which they will embarrass Purdue because that team is bad. They are so bad. It's tricky because I was looking at how they could potentially make the Big Ten title. The whole reason I wanted Ohio State to beat Oregon because I think it would be easier for us to pass Oregon than Ohio State. I think if they finish with one, like let's say their only loss is to Ohio State, I don't see how they don't get in. Now, there's still a lot left to prove. Like this back half of their schedule is a lot harder than the front half. I think if they finish with 2 losses, I don't think that's going to be enough. But if they go 11-1 and their only losses to Ohio State, I think they're going to get in. And especially with how many teams are losing around them. Like there's only 6 teams in the top 25 that are undefeated still. And there's only one from the SEC. It's Texas. And Penn State, they still have to play Ohio State. And and the only other teams are like Army and Navy and BYU. Like if they can keep this up and a bunch of teams around them have 2 losses and they only have 1, I think they sneak in, even if their best win is against Michigan or something.
Yeah, because I'm looking at your schedule right now. Nebraska this week, Washington, Michigan State, Michigan at home, and Ohio State, Purdue to close out as your last 3. I think there's a strong possibility you get the 9, potentially 10 wins this year. But I definitely could see a world where you're 11-1, and we're having this argument about should Indiana 11-1 team get, left out of the playoffs when you're going to have a 2-loss team in there. And then you get into the strength of record, the strength of schedule argument. But you're playing in the second-best conference in college football. You got some quality games in there. You beat Nebraska this week. You can beat Washington, Michigan. Those look like quality wins to me. So I really believe that not only is Indiana looking at a realm of getting into the playoffs, but possibly making it to the Big Ten title game. I know it sounds absurd, but with how ridiculous college football has been, Penn State could easily lose a game or 2. You feel me? Ohio State.
I think Penn State, I hate to cut you off. I think Penn State's one of the most overrated teams in the country. Yeah. I think they are not good at all. I think you put Penn State and IU on a neutral field, I think it's really close. Because that team should have lost to USC. I'm not really scared about them making the Big Ten title. I don't think they're beating Ohio State.
So is Indiana to you the second best team in the Big Ten or the third best team right now behind Oregon and Ohio State? Is it fair to say that?
I mean, I think it's really close. Oregon and Ohio State, I feel like are a step above everybody else. And I think you definitely saw that with the game that they played last week. I mean, that was a terrific game. And then you look at the other teams in the Big Ten. Penn State, I'm not too impressed by them. I'm not a big fan of Drew Aller. I think now I mentioned Tom Allen. Tom Allen is now their defensive coordinator. I think that's a good job for him because he was Indiana's defensive coordinator before he became the head coach. And he was a really good defensive coordinator. And every single team he had, the defense wasn't the problem. It was the offense couldn't move the ball. I think that's a good position for Tom Allen. But overall, like you put a post up that said who's the most overrated coach? It was like Ryan Day, Lane Kiffin,
Lincoln
and
Riley.
who was the third?
Lincoln Riley.
Lincoln Riley. And I put a comment, I said James Franklin. I think he's the most overrated coach in college football. But, I think Indiana's in that second tier with Penn State. I think your second tier after Ohio State and Oregon is Penn State, Indiana. I could throw in Illinois or a Nebraska. Both those teams have looked pretty good so far. I would throw in USC, but they've had some tough losses. They lost to Michigan and they lost to Minnesota too.
Yeah.
So I would definitely put Indiana in that second tier. And what gets tricky is Oregon already beat Ohio State, and Oregon doesn't have any other tough game. The hardest game they have is at Michigan, and I don't think they're going to lose to Michigan. So Oregon's most likely going to run the table, make the Big Ten title. After that, there's a world where Ohio State could lose to Penn State. There's a world where Indiana finishes with one loss. And so then let's say Penn State does upset Ohio State. Even if Indiana were to lose to Ohio State, they would have one loss. Ohio State would have two. So there's definitely a scenario where Indiana could squeak in there. And part of the reason is they got lucky with their Big Ten schedule. I'm not going to lie. Because each team in the Big Ten gets 5 home games, 4 away games, or 4 away, 5. It's 4 and 5 home and away. So Indiana got 5 home, 4 away. And their 4 away games, it was UCLA, Northwestern, and then Ohio State, Michigan State. And then they dodged some of the other really good teams. They don't have to play Oregon. They don't have to play Penn State. They don't have to play Illinois. They dodged a lot. They got really lucky with their schedule to where really you're playing. No one would have thought this, but with how good they've been, you're playing a 2-game season. You got to beat either one in Michigan or Ohio State. What does scare me is the game at Michigan State. I think because it's on the road and it's right before a big game, I think if they're going to slip up, that would be the game where they would. But I don't know. We could be seeing Indiana in the playoffs. I think definitely some work needs to happen around them because, let's say Notre Dame is 11-1. I think they'd be more inclined to put Notre Dame in, even though they really shouldn't because they lost to Northern Illinois.
I can't get over it neither.
I have friends that go to Northern Illinois. They were going crazy. But I'm really hoping Notre Dame picks up another loss. They have to play Army and Navy. Both those teams look really, really good. So, but the possibility is there for Indiana to make the playoff. And obviously I'm all for it if that can happen. But you were talking about basketball too. Part of the reason they haven't been very good in football is they put all their resources and money into basketball because no one really cared about football. But to be a dominant athletic program nowadays, you have to be good at football because that's where the money's at. So they basically told Curt Cignetti, look, you're running this because the booster, at an Auburn or a Florida or a school like that, the boosters are so heavily involved in, well, you need to be doing this. You need to be doing this. They've told Curt Cignetti, it's your show, man. Do whatever you need. And it's worked out great so far.
Everybody, this is Quincy Bell. You can subscribe to his YouTube channel, Quincy Bell Sports. You can also follow him on Instagram. The link will be down in the description down below. If you are enjoying this episode, leave a like, subscribe, hit that post notification button so you get alerted every time we drop new content. Check us out on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get your podcast from. The JT Sports Podcast is available. Now let's talk a little bit about Indiana's big upcoming matchup this weekend at home hosting Nebraska. Surprisingly, you're a 6.5-point favorite. And I was a little shocked by this number because I didn't think Vegas would give so much respect to Indiana in this sense because, they still haven't played the opponent relatively as talented as what Nebraska is. You beat Northwestern, looked really good against Maryland. But Nebraska is just like Indiana. They're having a season where they're better than what most people expected. And they got high expectations too, where they're hoping to be a surprise team that can get into the playoffs. Dylan Raiola has been outstanding as a true freshman. They got outstanding defense. I personally feel like Nebraska probably loses this game by a field goal. I believe that Indiana, with how consistent Curtis Rourke has been, he'll be more dependable in late game situations. Dylan Raiola, for as good as how he has played, in a couple of games, he's made some freshman mistakes. And defensively, Nebraska's defensive line is one of the best in the country. They're averaging like 5 sacks per game. But with how effective and efficient Indiana is offensively, I like the Hoosiers to win this one in a tightly contested contest. How are you feeling about this game?
So I also was a little bit surprised that Indiana was favored by 6.5. I thought that number was. I thought it was going to be more like 4.5, 3.5. So the key in this game is going to be, can Indiana's offense match up against Nebraska's defense? Because if you look at the other side, Indiana's defense versus Nebraska's offense, I think they're both pretty average to above average, but I don't see anything that's particularly strong from either one. So I think that's going to kind of even itself out. Nebraska's defense is really good. They beat Rutgers last week 14-7. So you know that their defense is going to come into play. I think it's a race. I think this is a race to like 24. I think whoever gets there first ends up winning. I think Nebraska's going to try to win this game like 17-14, 21-17. And I think Indiana's going to try to win it 35-31 or something like that. I think it's going to be whoever's style comes out ahead. I do like Curtis Rourke in a big game like this more than I do Dylan Raiola, just because, well, one is a super senior and one's a true freshman. That's not to say one's more talented than the other. It's just one has a ton more experience. This is also the most hyped up Indiana home game in at minimum 10 years, because the last time they were ranked and in the top 10, no one was allowed in the stadium. So I think that crowd, I'll be there. This crowd's going to be insanely, it's going to be wild. I mean, people are so excited about this team, and if the last game against Maryland was any indication, the crowd is going to be better. The game's already sold out. The game's been sold out since Monday. I think it's going to be close. I don't know if I like Indiana with the points, but I think they come out on top. I think they win this one. I think it's going to be like a 27-21 style game. Nebraska does have a good defense, but I think Indiana can win this one.
Before I let you get up on out of here, I want to get your thoughts overall about the Big Ten in general, because I don't think the Big Ten can hold a candlestick to what the SEC is right now. I definitely believe that there is a very huge gap between these two conferences and the depth of quality playoff caliber teams. The Big Ten, they probably only have about 3 teams, maybe 4, that look playoff caliber, compared to the SEC, where it's a logjam. It's like 5, 6 teams right now in the SEC that I could say could get into the playoffs right now. You know, Texas A&M looks good. Texas, we already know how much of a juggernaut they are, but you got Alabama, Tennessee, who've been down. Georgia, you can say they've been down somewhat, but it's just a logjam in the SEC this year. What are your thoughts? Do you really think that the Big Ten is just as good as the SEC, or we going to see another SEC national champion?
So, short answer, no. I don't think the Big Ten is as good as the SEC. I think the top teams can compete with teams in the SEC. Like if you put Oregon or Ohio State, or if you put one of those two in the SEC, like they're going to fare out pretty well. But then you start looking in the middle of the pack in the Big Ten. Iowa, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Washington, like the middle of the pack, it's just a whole lot of mid. Whereas in the SEC, you got who's competing for a playoff spot? Texas, Georgia, Bama, Tennessee, LSU, A&M. They got Vandy. So many. Dude, I watched that Vandy Alabama game. That game was crazy. But also, this is something that I think is specific to the SEC just because they have so much money and so much football history, but you can also apply it to other conferences. With NIL and the transfer portal, the teams that are at the top of the conference are not as good, I think, as they once were, and the teams that are near the middle to bottom aren't as bad. Where, like, on any given week, you could see an Arkansas take down a Tennessee, or you could see Vandy take down Alabama, just because with players able to come and get funding, like all these schools have money, they all have resources to give to people. It's leveled the playing field in sort of, and that's also part of the reason Indiana's doing so well. I mean, I'm telling you, I'm hoping that I hope every SEC team just eats each other alive. Like this upcoming week, I mean, like if Georgia were to beat Texas or like Alabama, Tennessee, those teams both already have one loss. So one of those is going to get their second loss. Like if Mississippi State were to take down a Texas A&M or something, like I hope the SEC just eats each other alive, because that's going to give so much more of a chance to Indiana. But the short answer, no. Like would Indiana finish in the top half of the SEC? Probably not. But yeah, that'd be my short answer. But the Big Ten, I mean, they still have a lot of quality teams. They're still better than the Big 12, the ACC, and all these other conferences.
Now, one last thing, if I let you get up on out of here, because you are from this part of the country, I know you've seen them. The Chicago Bears, man, you guys went from struggling early in the season. It looked like things were going to get ugly, and then you've turned it around these last couple of weeks. Caleb Williams has came on. The offense is starting to gel. How you feeling about the Chicago Bears up to this part of the season? Do you believe that they could win this division, make a little bit of a playoff run?
So we might have to do a whole nother episode about just the Bears. I would totally be down to come back for that. But if you guys don't know, I'm from Northwest Indiana. I live like 30 minutes from Chicago. So I was born and raised a Bears fan. I hated it when they traded Justin Fields. I wanted them to keep him. I thought he was turning a corner. I'm like, take Marvin Harrison first overall, and we're going to run the show. And then they traded him, and I did not like Caleb Williams coming out of college. I was very vocal about how I didn't like him. I didn't think he was a team player. I thought he was a prima donna. I thought he was a crybaby. And the first two games, that's what he looked like. He looked like garbage in the first two games. But he's figured it out. He's turned a corner. They looked really good against the Rams. They looked really good against who'd they beat last week?
The Jags.
They beat the Jaguars in London. They embarrassed them in London. And that's a team where I'm like, you don't beat that's London's team. You don't beat the Jaguars. He's looked really good. Now the thing is so does the rest of the NFC North. And the NFC North, I think, is a combined 17-5. Because the Lions were really good last year. They're still good this year. The Packers were the youngest team in the NFL last year, and they beat the Cowboys in the first round, and they've taken that momentum. And then Minnesota, I mean, I guess Sam Darnold's a top 10 quarterback now. I mean, the guy looks amazing. He has Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison to throw to, and they haven't even lost a game yet. So the Bears are 4-2, and they can still finish last in the division. So I think what's going to happen is I think all of those teams are going to go like 1-1 against each other in the divisional games. And I think it's just going to come down to who can clean up. I know the Bears, I think they have 3 games out of conference, not out of division, not out of conference. They still have to play San Francisco and the Commanders. And they play one other team.
Jaden versus Caleb.
That's going to be exciting. Jaden Daniels has looked really good. That's going to be exciting. And they got to clean up those other games. But the defense, every Chicago Bear defense is great. I really like this defense. Their secondary is so good, and they have a D-line that's really, really respectable. I love. He in the game against the Rams, he got called for like a pretty soft penalty, and then he had an interception, and then they said he jumped out of bounds. And he played the whole second half on a mission. He was killing people out there, and he got the game-winning interception.
It was one game I watched. He gave a dude a concussion. I was like, Jesus. Whew.
No, that guy can lay the hit. I'm a big fan of Jaquan Brisker, but we can talk more about the Bears later if you're down.
Absolutely, man. Everybody, this is Quincy Bell Sports that we have on. Make sure that you guys go ahead, show him some love. Follow him on Instagram, subscribe to his YouTube channel, and I appreciate you for coming on, my dude. Go Hoosiers.
Thanks, everybody. Go IU.